All right, thank you everyone for joining us here today. We really appreciate it. Today, we will be talking about DC's final building energy performance standards compliance regulations and the changes that were made from the draft rules. Next slide, please. So before we begin, just a big thank you to our members who help support our mission and help us expand our reach and our impact. So thank you very much to all of our supporters. Next slide. My name is Lindsay Falaska. I'm the director of the Building Innovation Hub, and we are also joined here today by Andrew Held, the Energy Program Specialist with a focus on BEPS at DOE. We'll be here to talk you through everything related to the rules, the nuances, and be able to answer lots of your questions that you have as well. Next slide. So just before we begin, just a minute to introduce the Building Innovation Hub to folks who don't know. We were created specifically to support the local building industry navigate the building energy performance standards and other building regulations, and also help folks look towards the long-term climate and green building goals the district and beyond has. And with that, I will turn it over to Andrew on the next slide to kick us off for our actual crux of the presentation. So go ahead, Andrew.
All right, thank you, Lindsay, and thank you to the Hub for hosting. So yeah, I'm going to be diving into the final BEPS rulemaking that was published in the Register on November 5th, 2021. This is final rulemaking that comes after 2 rounds of proposed rulemaking and 2 rounds of public comment. So this is, taking into account all of the great stakeholder feedback we got through those public comment rounds, as well as the BEPS task force and other avenues. This is kind of our final product of the rules. We are very excited to have it finally out and to be able to share it with everybody. I'm going to try to not do this with my mouse because I think I will skip slides. So real quickly, this slide is way too busy, but this is all the register links for all the rulemaking having to do with the BEPS program. I think Lindsay will send this around afterwards, so this will be available to everybody if you're curious to actually reading the text of the proposed rulemaking, final rulemaking, for any of our rulemaking. And then to really give a quick overview of the different sections and what's in them. So the BEPS rulemaking comprises 6 sections of the municipal regulations. We kind of have it broken up into 2 chunks. There's 3517 through 3521, which lays out the actual compliance rulemaking, what a building owner that doesn't meet the BEPS needs to do in a given compliance cycle. This is what was finalized on November 5th. And then 3530, which is the actual standards themselves for the first compliance cycle. This was finalized back in April, but it was effective back in January 1st, 2021, when we were required by law to establish them. These just basically say, what are the BEPS for each property type to help building owners understand whether or not they actually meet them. Some key definitions just to cover up front. Building energy performance standards, or BEPS. So this is the level of energy efficiency set forth by DOE, that is required by the Clean Energy Omnibus Act. For buildings that can receive an Energy Star score, it is measured in Energy Star score. For buildings that cannot receive an Energy Star score, it's measured in normalized source EUI or just source EUI. A BEPS period is the time during which a specific BEPS is in effect. BEPS periods run in 6 cycles or 6-year increments. So the 2021 BEPS are in effect from January 1st, 2021 to January 1st, 2027. Compliance cycle is the 5-year period within the BEPS period that which building owners who own buildings that do not meet the BEPS are required to complete various energy performance or reporting requirements to improve their building. And then property types, or the primary property type as determined by the portfolio manager. If you benchmark a building, I imagine you are familiar with this. So diving right in, I will say up front, not much has changed from the final rulemaking from the second proposed. There's a lot of clarifying stuff we added, as well as some removal of certain terms to expand and make things more inclusive. I'll try to highlight them as I go. I don't remember if I highlighted them actually in red. but just know, if you are aware of there's both a red lines on our website as well as lengthy discussion at the front of the rulemaking that describes the public comment received and any changes that were made. So 3517 lays out how a building is supposed to determine whether or not they meet the BEPS. It also lays out the BEPS period, those 6 cycles, those 6-year increments, and compliance cycles, those 5-year increments. And it puts the requirement on the owner to determine whether their building has met the BEPS under 3530, which is the actual BEPS. And it also lays out the timeline for square foot applicability. So this arrow is very much in the way of my other text, I just realized, but so this is loosely following the benchmarking requirements. In BEPS 1, we have private buildings 50,000 square feet and above, and DC-owned buildings 10,000 square feet and above. In BEPS 2, which will start January 1st, 2027, we'll have private buildings 25,000 square feet and above. And BEPS 3, which will start January 1st, 2033, will have all buildings, private and public, 10,000 square feet and above, exclusive of federal and embassy buildings. So that's determining whether or not you're building met the BEPS. That's all covered in 3517. 3518 gets into the actual compliance pathway. So you have a building, you've read through 3517, you've determined your building doesn't meet the BEPS, on to 3518. If you read through 3517 and determine your building does meet the BEPS, then you have no requirements for the current compliance cycle. You are not on a compliance cycle. But for those buildings that don't meet the BEPS, there are 3 principal pathways we are laying out. There's the performance pathway, which calls for a 20% decrease in site energy use intensity, average over the last 2 years of the compliance cycle as compared to the site UI average over the 2 years preceding the first year of the compliance cycle. So the baseline period is the 2 years preceding the compliance cycle. The evaluation period is the last 2 years of the compliance cycle. I will flag here for BEPS 1, this is very different due to COVID. I will cover that in a second. There is the standard target pathway, which says that for property types for which the BEPS is above the national median, so that if you're an office, the BEPS is a 71, which is higher than a 50, which means it can take this pathway. All they need to do is actually meet the BEPS. So if you have an office building that is a score of 60, it is conceivable that it will take less than a 20% reduction to reach a 71. You can go ahead and do that and achieve compliance that way. This is not limited to buildings that are less than 20% away from the standard. If you're an office building and you have a score of 49 and you are putting a lot of work into your building, you can also comply with the standard target pathway this way. For buildings and property types that can't receive an NHR score, this is measured in weather normalized source EUI. And then there's the prescriptive pathway, which basically is loosely an ASHRAE 100 level approach. Basically says meeting reporting milestones across 4 phases and completing a list of DOE approved and building owner proposed energy efficiency measures will be used to demonstrate compliance. So there's actually no measurement of performance on this pathway. What the building owner will do is they will complete an ASHRAE level 2 audit. They will provide that audit to DOE. They will also provide an action plan saying, I would like to do these measures, and the sum of savings of these measures is equivalent to that of the performance pathway. And then all they need to do is demonstrate that they implemented those measures. They don't need to demonstrate that they actually achieved those savings. They'll be in compliance because they demonstrated they implemented those measures. Other compliance pathways. So there's alternative compliance pathways. These are pathways proposed by the building owner, or this is a pathway that is ultimately proposed by the building owner and is agreed to by DOE. This is designed to achieve energy savings comparable to the performance pathway still, but this is where we are opening the doors to building owners who have innovative ideas and feel that there is some limitation from the performance pathway or another principal pathway that is. We make sure folks are muted. Thank you. This is also where we build in a lot of flexibility for building owners undergoing specific situations. So if you're a historic building, if you are a building that is newly installing mechanical ventilation, we have something called baseline adjustments, which fall under the alternative compliance pathway. to allow you to go out and do those activities and install those measures or continue to be a historic building and not be penalized under the BEPS program. You still need to likely demonstrate energy savings of some amount, but the idea is to basically remove that restriction from your requirements. Also under alternative compliance pathways are deep energy retrofits. So if you're a building owner that wants to, go beyond the performance pathway, or conversely, you're a specific type of building that has certain structural, organizational structural limitations like college, university, and you need more time to get more savings, those are both covered under alternative compliance pathways. I will point everyone to go read our BEPS compliance guidebook. It covers this in a lot greater detail. And the other pathway I want to talk about here is the 2021 option. So this is only for the BEPS period beginning January 1st, 2021, the one we are currently in. And this is our way of addressing concerns that were raised having to do with the impact of the COVID public health emergency on the building community. So the first is we move the actual baseline period for the performance pathway. If you recall from that wordy explanation on the previous slide, originally it was going to be the average of the 2 years preceding the compliance pathway, which would be the average of 19 and 20. I think we can all admit 2020 was a very odd year for all of us, and it was especially odd for building energy data in the district. And so our goal is to not penalize buildings for not being occupied and having a lower baseline than necessary. So we just shifted that back. We shifted that to 2018, 2019, so that does not cover COVID. And then we moved the evaluation period to just be a single year, and we actually granted a delay to anyone who demonstrated they consumed energy during the COVID health emergency, public health emergency. So the 20% savings, instead of it having to be demonstrated on the average of 2024 and 2025 data, it just has to be demonstrated in 2026. So we've effectively given everyone really a 2-year extension. They no longer have to deal with an average of 2 years, and we move it back a year. This is applicable to both performance and standard target pathway. I'll flag standard target pathway doesn't have a baseline, so there's no need to actually shift the baseline. The building owner just needs to demonstrate they met the BEPS in 2026. Okay, moving on, and we'll pause for questions later because I'm sure I just dumped a lot of information that has a lot of questions for folks. But moving into 3518.2 and 3. So these are just to ensure that the building is fairly complying, such that they're not messing with their benchmarking report to simulate reductions in energy consumption. We want them to be as consistent as possible throughout the compliance period. So if you had gross floor area that was part of your report in 2019, you're not allowed to exclude it under the portfolio management exclusion criteria unless you are also able to go back and include it for 2019. And then 3518.3 basically just says that the building owner shall not, in the process of complying with these requirements, implement a measure that poses a threat to the health and safety of building occupants. No shutting off ventilation to reduce energy consumption, stuff like that. On to 3519, reporting and verification. So again, this first bullet here goes to the COVID public health emergency. We moved all the reporting dates back a year for buildings that demonstrated they consumed energy during the public health emergency, which is still ongoing. So all these dates I'm going to talk about here, I believe we have shifted them back in this presentation. If not, I will note that they have been shifted back a year. Oh yeah, we know. So I will note what the year is for the actual first compliance cycle. So all pathways, the building owner shall select a compliance pathway for DOE approval no later than April 1st, 1 year from the start of the compliance cycle. With the COVID health delay, that is April 1st, 2023, not 2022. So nothing is due April 2022. For BEPS, there's another year. DOE will not approve the selection of the prescriptive pathway until an energy audit has been submitted. One of the first steps of the prescriptive pathway is conducting an energy audit. One of the prerequisites for being actually allowed on the prescriptive pathway is that you've already completed that audit. This is to ensure that the phases of the prescriptive pathway line up within the given compliance cycle. All buildings receiving a 1-year delay, receiving a COVID delay, shall select one of the 2021 options. This is to ensure that building owners basically simplify and they're getting the benefit and they don't actually end up on a pathway that's not beneficial to them. We just wanted to keep things as streamlined as possible. And then if a building owner does not select a compliance pathway, you'll go ahead and assign a pathway. And then, yeah, and again, reiterating, all the deadlines we're going to talk about have been moved back a year for this first cycle. So continuing on the reporting verification requirements, a pathway can be changed at any point. If you're, in year 3 of implementing the prescriptive pathway and you decide, I can just comply with the performance pathway, it's easier and less onerous. You are welcome to change pathways at any time. All you have to do is provide a narrative demonstrating good cause to DOE that you want to change pathways. And then for the performance and standard target pathway, besides pathway selection and benchmarking, the only other reporting requirement is a very simple survey called the Complete Actions Report. And it's just, we want to know what was done in the building to get a sense of what actions building owners were taking. And this is due at the end of the compliance cycle. So this will be due for compliance cycle 1, we'll do April 1st, 2027. Prescriptive pathway reporting. So again, kind of mentioned this earlier, but it's broken into 4 phases. The first phase is the energy audit, which is due at the same time as pathway selection. Phase 2 is the action plan, which is where you take everything you got from the energy audit and you say, okay, these are the measures I want to do. This gets submitted to DOE. We say, okay, they're approved. And then you move into the implementation stage, which you have 2 years to complete, which just says 2 years to implement the EMs you said you were, and provide documentation, be it invoices, photos of the sites. There's a bunch of examples in the guidebook. We also are open to proposals from building owners for how they would like to do this. This is due 4 years from the start of the cycle, 5 years for this cycle. And then evaluation, monitoring, and verification report. This is just to conduct any sort of necessary testing and commissioning from the implementation. And we give another year after the implementation to do that. So this wraps up nicely within the compliance cycle again. For BEPS period 1, compliance cycle 1, phase 1 is due April 1st, 2023. Phase 2 is April 1st, 2024. Phase 3 is due April 1st, 2026. And phase 4 is due April 1st, 2027. There are 2 contracting requirement or professional requirements on the prescriptive pathway. The energy audit must be conducted by an energy auditor who is either a certified energy auditor, CEM, or other license that will be posted to our online portal. And then we are, we do want to allow retrocommissioning as a prescriptive pathway measure. And we actually detail kind of our approved way of how a building can go out and do retrocommissioning and receive credit on the prescriptive pathway. And the only thing we add in terms of professional requirements is that it must meet the professional minimum qualifications for a commissioning agent under DCRA's requirements, or again, any other license or credentials posted to our portal. And then other reporting and verification requirements. So again, ACP is going to be what's proposed by the building owner, and then DOE will agree to it. As part of that proposal, the building owner will be required in saying what they would like to actually report to us to demonstrate compliance, and we will agree to that. And that basically becomes a conforming document, and building owners will just have to meet the requirements under that. District benchmarking reports can be used for demonstrating energy performance requirements. So on the performance pathway, to demonstrate you met the 20% reduction, all you really need to do is submit a benchmark report and nothing else. There might be some times where we ask for additional supporting documentation, or require, that anything reported to us is complete and accurate. So this kind of gets into pathway denial, revocation, or designation. So in cases where a building owner fails to submit complete accurate reports on time, or fails to implement the requirement of a compliance pathway, or fails to demonstrate energy savings required by DOE approved pathway for the previous compliance cycle, DOE has the authority to deny or revoke your pathway selection. These are generally for what we would consider fringe cases. Basically, if they're not meeting the existing requirements, we might require that they leave the prescriptive pathway, given that they can't keep up with the reporting requirements there. It might also be that they promise something in cycle 1 and did not achieve it. And in cycle 2, we are going to be a little bit more judicious on what pathway we approve. Change of ownership disclosure. So if a building owner does not meet the BEPS and the building is transferred, the ownership of the building is transferred to the compliance cycle, this is a requirement that the seller provide the buyer of this following information prior to transfer or sale of the property. We also require that the buyer notify DOE of the transfer or sale within 60 days after completion of closing. This is just to ensure all documentation is properly transferred and that the building owner is aware of the requirements, and that any sort of necessary delays of compliance or assistance can be given to the new buyer upon transfer of ownership. 3520. So now we're getting into delays of compliance. So building owners may apply for exemption from BEPS or delayed compliance with the performance procedural requirements. There's a process by which they submit a form. Delays can only go up to 3 years per the legislation for most buildings. One of those years is already being used by the COVID delay. So for BEPS period 1, compliance cycle 1, there's only a max of 2 additional years that can be given on top of the COVID delay per the legislation. And then qualifying affordable housing buildings can have delays in compliance greater than 3 years. And we get into what circumstances in a second. We'll say the only exemption from BEPS per the legislation is if the building is demolished. This is, I think, one of the big changes that we made from the previous proposed rulemaking, was that originally it said completely demolished, and that was much too restrictive. So now we're just calling this demolished buildings. So if you don't raise the building to the ground, but it is no longer a building, it can still be exempted. But this is just saying we will exempt those buildings, or those former buildings. And this slide is all sorts of screwed up. But these are the reasons that a building owner might be able to request a delay from us. I will try to read them and then do them from memory, and then I'll fix this before this goes out. But the situation the building must be in to be eligible for delay is they must be in financial distress, had a change of ownership during the cycle, the building is undergoing a major renovation, the building becomes unoccupied, there is pending demolition, there's a change of property type, the building, again, this next bullet, which is cut off, and my apologies, is if the building consumed energy during the public health emergency, therefore, AKA the COVID delay. And then the last one, which is kind of half on the screen, half not, is if the building is pursuing an innovative approach to energy efficiency and requires more time to implement this innovative approach. We'll give more time for that as well. Wish I put this slide earlier, to be honest, but this is explaining what actually the COVID delay does. Basically, what we're doing is we are granting an extra year automatically for all buildings. So normally compliance cycles again are 5 years. This first compliance cycle will be 6 years for most buildings. Other delay of compliance requirements. There might be instances where we attach additional conditions to the delay of compliance, meaning we might require a different compliance pathway in the future, or we might adjust the verification requirements to ensure that the building is being held accountable towards achieving compliance even with the delay. And then delays do not, the approval of a delay does not delay the start of the next BEPS period for a given building. So that means that if you receive a delay till 2029, which is the max delay you can receive under, or 2028, 2028, under BEPS period 1, that does not delay the start of BEPS period 2 for your building. You will still be evaluated as to whether you meet BEPS, and you will still have requirements that are due in 2032. But we might shift those requirements to ensure that they are fair and equitable for the building, given the terms of the delay. Again, I highly recommend reading the guidebook. It covers this in a lot greater detail. Okay, alternative compliance penalties and enforcements. This is a doozy. So building owners that fail to demonstrate the implementation of a compliance pathway will be assessed a maximum penalty of $10 per square foot based on their latest HR portfolio manager report. And the max of this penalty shall be no greater than $7.5 million. And then for college universities, it'll just be set at $7.5 million. And then it'll be reduced, the maximum penalty that's assessed will be reduced proportional to a building's performance relative to the pathway target as described here. So standard target pathways on the next slide, it's a little bit more complicated, but most of these are pretty straightforward. Performance pathway, the maximum penalty is reduced based on the proportion of how much savings was achieved versus the actual target. So if you get half the way there, you achieve 10% savings when you're supposed to achieve 20, you get a 50% reduction in your maximum penalty. On the prescriptive pathway, it's based off of points that are determined based off of the relative estimated savings each EEM that's being implemented is designated to achieve. Should maybe mention this a little bit earlier, but there's a 25 point requirement on this pathway, given that these are estimated savings and there is often a gap between estimated and achieved savings. So we require that buildings identify a little bit more to ensure that they're still achieving comparable savings to the performance pathway. And then alternative compliance pathways will be handled in each individual agreement. And then the standard target pathway, which is actually a lot simpler now than the second proposed rules, and that's one of the biggest changes as well. But it shall be adjusted by dividing the building's distance from the BEPS achieved by the distance from the BEPS for a building of the same property type that are 20% less efficient than the BEPS. So there's a lot. I'm going to go through the example because it's a little bit confusing. Building B is 6 points away from the BEPS by the end of the compliance cycle. A building of building B's property type that is 20% less efficient than the BEPS is 15 points away from the BEPS. So if you are an office building, the BEPS is 71. I believe the score that is exactly 20% away from a 71 for office buildings is like 56 or 55. So it's the distance between 71, 56, 55. It's not applicable to this example necessarily. But then, so building B is 6 points away at the end. 15 points is kind of that 20% away from the BEPS number. So the final penalty is 40% of the maximum penalty originally assessed. 6 divided by 15 is 40%. So that's how we adjust for the standard target pathway. It enables us to basically give credit to the building owner and the building for work they've already done to be close to the BEPS and provide a fair, equitable comparison to the other pathways. Other enforcement items. There are a couple scenarios where basically we will forego any sort of maximum penalty adjustments in the assessments. This is to discourage these activities. This is in cases where the building owner knowingly withholds information or submits inaccurate information, fails to submit an accurate benchmarking report at the end of the compliance cycle or the end of the delay, or implements a measure that poses a threat to the health and safety including reduction of indoor environmental quality of a building occupant or user. And then I covered in 3519 a various number of fines, or a various number of reporting requirements. There are associated fines associated with each of those. I'm not going to cover those right now because they are not actually out. And then this covers all the definitions that are established in the actual rulemaking. Don't believe these have changed too much, but you can read them all in the actual rulemaking. And I think that is it.
Thank you, Andrew. And we will certainly open it up at the end for questions. I think there's a few popped in there for you that your team has been answering as well, but we'll call them as well. So before we wrap up or sort of get back to any questions about regulations, I just want to share some information about available resources that are here to help. I know there's some inquiries in the chat about information and what's sort of available and how to help clients navigate some of these changes. So I just want to walk through some of the resources that we have on our site. And DOEE also has plenty of resources on their site as well. So next slide. So just because BEPS is built on benchmarking, it's important that we understand basically the root and sort of what this is all based on. And so we do have an overview of the benchmarking requirements, which is specifically for this group, probably more tailored to what it means to have third-party data verification and what that actually means, because you all have been if you're subject to BEPS, you've been benchmarking for many years now, and that's probably the biggest change to make note of. Next slide. We also have a guide to common errors in benchmarking. Now that your benchmarking information matters and is being used in this sort of way, it's important to understand what it's telling you and how to actually look at it for potentially errors in your data to make sure that it's accurate. Next slide. And then once you have accurate benchmarking data, we also have a guide to understanding your data. So knowing what to do when you get it, what to look for, what metrics are important to keep in mind as well, especially as BEPS takes effect. And then of course, based on everything Andrew just said, we also have a plain speak version of the ordinance language. So we take a lot of what DOEE has done in their ordinance and turn it around a little bit to be in plain speak so that it's sort of a digestible format, and hopefully it helps everyone understand what's being asked of them, what the ordinance language says. So it should help break down some of the things that Andrew has been talking about. And then because I know we've got a lot of folks in the development community, we also have resources on our site that talks about where code meets BEPS. So when we're talking about new construction, what does it mean for new buildings and BEPS? As we should sort of note, once a building is built, even if it's a new building, it becomes an existing building as soon as it gets its C of O. And so understanding what happens to build to code or what is needed in terms of building above code, especially as BEPS takes effect, is important. And this is a technical guide about what those two or where those two intersect. And then as everyone sort of starts on their path to improving building performance and looking for service providers, we do have a service procurement guide on our website that effectively walks through the different steps that most folks will be taking, and it provides guidance in terms of what to look for in vendors, what steps to take, where to find more information, what certifications to look for. And so it sort of outlines all the different steps involved in the process of improving building performance. And one of the last ones, of course, is what are the financial options available to help pay for some of these things. So on our website is a funding and financing map where we've basically collated all of the existing incentives, financial options from your local financial institutions, the Green Bank, the DCSU, PEPCO, and all of the others mentioned here. So you can sort through the administrator, you can sort by building type or the type of energy type that you're looking to improve and find available incentives that are there to help pay for some of these upgrades. And then lastly, what you should do now. So we want to make sure that folks understand sort of what their first steps are coming out of the gate and what it actually means to take action as these rules have been finalized now. So the first step we always want to make sure people do is to look at their data and make sure it's accurate, to make sure that you know exactly what your baseline is and how you're actually improving. Data verification is required for everyone in 2024 for the data submitted in 2023. And we just want to make sure that folks are getting ahead of what that means to make sure that their data is accurate now so that we're making accurate and informed decisions based on correct data. And the second thing, based on that correct data, we want folks to do is understand the different compliance pathway options that Andrew outlined. If your building or whoever you're servicing does not meet the BEPS, that is the first deadline to make note of, which is April 1st, 2023, for the folks who are choosing this sort of longer COVID delayed compliance pathways. So choosing the compliance pathway is only about a year away. And so we want to make sure that folks are thinking about that sooner than later, understanding the different options that are available, understanding what path makes the most sense for them, and crafting a plan accordingly. And so we want to make sure that folks know that even though the deadline, so to speak, for the end of the compliance pathway isn't for several years, there is a mandatory interim deadline that folks need to be aware of and be paying attention to. And that's not meant to be punitive to folks. It's just to get folks thinking in advance and make sure that people are being proactive about a plan to make sure that their buildings are improving performance as required to do so. And we also have, in terms of actions to take, is to explore the building performance knowledge base. So this is something that DOEE has launched. Andrew, you're welcome to sort of provide extra commentary on that as well. And then the building owner portal will be coming soon. You'll see a lot of references in the BEPS compliance guidebook related to the building owner portal and how it will be sort of the central portal for all sort of reporting and documentation and sort of the place to ask questions and receive information and sort of hold all that information. Andrew, I don't know if you want to add a little more information to it than that.
I'll just kind of probably end up restating what you just said. Yeah, the knowledge base is designed to be kind of the public facing side of that owner portal. So it's going to be basically a reskin of our existing website, organized in a little bit better fashion, but it's where we're going to keep up to date information on both the benchmarking, the data verification program as it rolls out, as well as the BEPS program. It's also the centralized location for our help desks now. So if you have a question, it'll be answered through the portal, which can be accessed through the knowledge base. And then the building owner portal is really our way of trying to turn over the information that building owners are submitting us back to them and give them the additional tools and guidance they need to comply with the program. So like Lindsay, like you said, it's where you'll find all your past benchmarking data that you've submitted to us. We pull out a portfolio manager. It's where you'll find all relevant correspondence that you've had with us through the help desk. It'll also be where you can find all the forms that are referenced in the rules and the guidebook. So everyone is probably clamoring for the pathway selection form. It is coming soon. It'll be on the owner portal. It'll be on the knowledge base. That's how you'll access it. That's how you'll check to see that you have submitted it and that the pathway has been approved, as well as email notification from us.
Thank you, Andrew. And then the other action I want to point people to, we have just started basically BEPS roundtables discussions. I see a note in the chat about sort of making sure that owners have all the information that they need or sort of want to talk more about it. And so the idea with these roundtables is that there'll be small peer-to-peer groups for sort of whether it's like buildings or like disciplines to be able to talk about the rules, ask specific questions. We'll have DOEE on call to sort of get into some nuances. And so we'll want to make sure that folks are able to sort of have sort of these more intimate conversations about what's being expected of them and how their peers are also addressing it. So our first one will be on December 1st, and we will send out a link after this presentation. Oh, double down on it. We'll send out a link afterwards. And so we are also happy to answer questions here. And then of course, folks can also follow up offline via email if they have any other questions. And I want to open it up. There was one question in the chat earlier from Scott that we didn't totally understand. So Scott, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Lindsay, he actually messaged me direct. Hi, everyone. This is Katie Bergfeld from DOEE. He actually messaged me directly and gave me some more clarity. So I can just read that. And then Andrew, if you want to answer it, you can. So he's asking about section 3518.3, which is about not implementing any measures that would harm the indoor environmental air quality or indoor environmental quality of the building or do harm to anyone in the building in terms of IAQ. As he said, to clarify, he read this part of the regulations. He understands that an owner cannot, for example, turn off a ventilation system to reduce energy use. But what if the ventilation system is already turned off? Would that go against what's in our regulations?
I don't believe it would. There are obviously ways in which we try to address inactive equipment that should be active through the retrocommissioning, EM, but we don't, I think, have a way of enforcing building owners that aren't currently what they're doing to do something different. That's, there are property maintenance codes put out by DCRA. There are other programs that are designed to address that. We're here to look at a building's performance in a certain period of time and say they have to do better by another period of time. And this is a guideline about what they can and cannot do to achieve those savings.
Yeah, just to add to that, Scott. So the first part of the section says a building owner shall not in the process of complying with this chapter. So somebody who already had a ventilation system that was turned off didn't do that just to comply with this chapter, right? They weren't actively doing that in terms of trying to reduce their energy usage. It just was already there. So as Andrew stated, it's not something that we would necessarily enforce.
So the next question from Amy Jacks, what is the deadline for an owner to propose an alternative compliance solution prior to April 1st, 2023? And how much time does DOEE anticipate it will take to reach a resolution?
So I think this is not reflected in the guide. This is reflected in the updates to the guidebook that are coming, but there's no deadline on proposing an ACP option. There is a implicit deadline if you want to be on that ACP when you go through pathway selection. It needs to be due at the same time as pathway selection. It actually will be submitted through the same form. But if you at some point after pathway selection want to propose an ACP and change pathways, that is also available. So there's no limit on when you can propose and be approved for pathway selection, ACP. But if you want to be on that ACP from the get-go, then it's due at the same time as pathway selection. I don't think we have any. I think in the current version of the guidebook, we had sort of a turnaround time. I don't know if we're removing that or sticking to that, but we will try to get them as quickly as possible.
Can you tell us or remind us potentially what is the draft then in the compliance guidebook related to turnaround time? Is that with the note that it is a draft? Okay.
Not, it might have been like a month in review.
Okay. So still being finalized is the sort of short answer then.
Yeah.
Another question from Scott, is there an adjustment made for added energy use if such a system is recommissioned related to that ventilation system?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So yes, potentially there is baseline adjustments are designed to be super flexible and meet the building with the unique situation they're doing. So there's a specific call out for, in the current version of the guidebook, new ventilation, but we're also adding a line in there to talk about increased ventilation. So if you have an existing ventilation system that was turned off for whatever reason, and you've recommissioned it so that it's on now, thereby increasing your ventilation, you are eligible for that baseline adjustment. I'm sure that doesn't address every situation under the sun. So baseline adjustments are intentionally left kind of open-ended, and the ones we've laid out are the most common ones we expect we'll need to address, but it's, again, designed to be flexible and try to meet the building with the issues they're encountering.
I'm sure there are going to be. Yeah.
There we go. Sorry.
I was going to say, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of nuances and nuanced questions that come up. So the email address on the last slide is if you guys have follow-up questions or sort of nuanced questions that you want answers to understand how this addresses your specific projects, please reach out to Andrew via this email address, and that way it all gets sort of collected and collated. And this way, sort of as sort of questions, similar questions pop up, we can add them to FAQs and make sure that everyone has access to the answers that folks are sort of interested in. And the last question that just popped in is there an expected date for the final guidebook? You guys have an anticipated time to finalize?
Not at this time. We're still reviewing the public comments we received and revising. Obviously, with final rules out there, we want to get it done as soon as possible, but the guidebook is not the enforcement document per se. It's the rules. So if building owners want to go ahead and begin compliance, they're more than welcome to, because the rules are final.
I think maybe it's important to double down on that now with the rules being finalized, the establishment of the BEPS being finalized, effectively the rules are finalized. And so we want to make sure that folks understand that even though the guidebook is not finalized, the sort of actions and what is being asked of people is. And the guidebook really just provides a path for reporting versus sort of a description or a mandate for what to do. I don't know if you want to, but
I'll just add on. So like, for example, you can go get your ASHRAE level 2 audit. That's in the rules. That's part of the prescriptive pathway. Even if you're not looking at the prescriptive pathway, probably best practice. But the guidebook is not going to change that. That's going to be a requirement of the prescriptive pathway no matter what. I also say the guidebook, based on public comment, is definitely getting refined and adding a lot more context and a lot of clarity. We received a lot of great public comment to that effect. Major tenets of the guidebook are not going to change from the draft version to the final one. So it's not going to, if you are starting to follow something that is laid out in the guidebook, at this point, between now and when it's finalized, it will not throw you off the path.
thank you. And so not seeing any more comments in the chat. Go ahead,
Did we
Katie.
respond to Todd's question? Todd Steffens?
That's a good one. I'll read it out. Okay. How many inquiries / interest has the DOEE been receiving from building owners and management regarding BEPS compliance? Many of our clients are either completely unaware of this legislation or only have a small amount of information on the requirements.
Yeah, so we've done numerous rounds of outreach to building owners. We've sent physical mailers, we've sent email notices of the BEPS requirements. Organizations like the Building Innovation Hub and the SCU and the Green Bank have all been doing outreach of their own to try to reach building owners. So we're doing everything in our power to try to communicate this. And we also understand a lot of this is going to be done through service providers that are going to be translating what we put out there and providing that as a service to their client to help them navigate this. So we're trying to fire on all cylinders to get the word out there. We understand some building owners are harder to reach than others, and we also understand some have had other things to deal with in the past year, and without final rules, maybe a little willing to kind of put it to the side for now. But now that everything's finalized, we're definitely revisiting our efforts to reach out to, especially the hard to reach building owners and those that are in most need of assistance. Think affordable housing that are subject to BEPS. Think Class B and C office. Think houses of worship.
And we will also, as I say, we will also be scheduling more presentations like this. We can start to dive in. Now that the rules are finalized, we can do more overview presentations, and we can also start doing specific presentations related to compliance pathways as folks start to sort of make determinations about how to actually address performance in their building. So please do reach out if there's information you need or information you want to share. We'll be sharing this presentation, the slides, all of the links that were mentioned. Please also register for the roundtable. If some of your clients are having questions about what this all means, we're happy to sort of do sort of more tailored conversations as well. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, and Todd, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any sort of associations that maybe we should be talking with. We are pretty in tune with AOBA, DCBIA, and several other large industry associations here in the district. Lindsay and I just presented to the Cooperative Housing Coalition a week and a half ago or so. So if you know of any associations that maybe we should be reaching out with and working with, we'd be happy to do that. And with them, we're going to come up with our own strategy sort of how to really get the word out there, working with our friends at the Building Innovation Hub to figure all that out.
Yeah, we're always happy to receive feedback on if there are folks we're not reaching, how we can reach them, or feel free to put us in direct contact. Frankly, we're happy to help. So now I think that was the last question. So we will follow up with slides, recording, links, as well as resources on our website, including links to the final regs, as well as our plain speak version as well to help folks understand what's being asked of them. And like I said, feel free to follow up with anyone on this call with questions or specifics that you guys have about your specific projects or buildings. We're happy to help get folks off the starting block and understand what's being asked of them and what actions to take. And so with that, I want to thank Andrew for joining us today, as well as all of his other colleagues at DOEE for support and answering the questions. So thank you all and have a good day.
So,
thank you.